strong Pokémon. Weak Pokémon. That's everyone's selfish vision. But what happens when you go all the way from strong to weak? Well, believe it or not, I've just repeated the intro of the previous video, so today we don't need any more of that. If in the previous part we talked about the most nerfed Pokémon, the ones that took the worst part of each generation, today's time for the other side of the coin, the ones that benefited the most from the changes between games. Because it's amazing how a helpful setting, a small ability change, or a couple of new moves can make the tables turn for a Pokémon. Going from being a perfect fit in a youngster's team to having a champion rely on its skills. So unlike the previous video, let's follow the classic order this time, starting with the first generation leap to the second gen. We already mentioned in the previous video how catastrophic the special split was for several Pokemon, but for some it was the opposite. On one hand, we have Muck, who became a beast thanks to its dramatically boosted special defense and Sludge Bomb. Or Snorlax, perhaps the most dominant life form ever to exist in overused of any generation. But could there be a Pokemon that benefited even more than this? Marowak was the one blessed with all the changes that came with the release of the second gen. First, it's one of the Pokemon that most improved after that statistical split, keeping its bad special attack that doesn't really matter, but increasing its defense by 30 points. However, its great redemption would not lie there, but rather in the other most important new feature in terms of battles. Held items, which didn't exist until then, but not just any item, but one made specifically for Marowak, the Thick Club. The item transformed it into the strongest Pokemon of the generation in terms of sheer brute force. This nonsense doubles its already good physical attack, making without a doubt Marowak the hardest hitting Pokemon in the game. If you think that's not enough, it got access to Swords Dance, getting with only one 999 attack, the limit of the generation. But I'm selling it like it's the best Pokemon ever, and it's not that either. Marowak is slow, and its low HP makes it somewhat fragile. But with a little help and residual damage, it could really wreak havoc. And don't forget that it was one of the worst fully evolved Pokemon in the original Pokedex. The way the Lavender Tower was reborn as the Radio Tower in this generation is also a good symbol of the redemption that was finally given to this unfortunate Pokemon. But speaking of redemption, it's Gen 3 time. The introduction of abilities, once again, rescued countless Pokemon from irrelevance, while others, already good as they were, would improve even more. Like Tyranitar, who would proclaim itself a tyrant, the absolute ruler and cornerstone of the competitive with its new ability, Sandstream, summoning a weather with its mere presence, only comparable to the power of the gods of the moment. No, even better, as Sandstorm was considered the most powerful and dominant weather. But once again, if it's about rising from the ashes and improving drastically from one generation to the next, the discussion is over quickly because in this era, the most radical case ever seen happened. If with Marowak, we were talking about a mediocre Pokemon that managed to become one of the elites, here we are dealing with a cool species, but practically unusable in a real battle. The idea seems great at first. Massive HP and bad defenses to receive the biggest possible hit, resist it, and return it with double the power. But good luck trying to make this work with someone who knows what he's doing. The opponent could just switch and do a lot of things while BUFFED was trying to return a hit that never came. And having Snorlax with Curse around it all became an even worse idea. Plus, it's one of the slowest Pokemon in the game, so Destiny Bond wasn't reliable either. But isn't that the point of this creature? To return the hits and offenses with even more strength? How fitting for it that in the third gen, the tables were turned, becoming one of the most feared Pokemon ever. With the introduction of abilities, BUFFED would be blessed with Shadow Tag, which wasn't just unique to its species and perhaps the most broken one in the game, but in its hands, it would solve all of BUFFED's problems. Because now to switch to send out something that would render its strategy useless was impossible. But it got Encore on top of that, which made it even more terrifying. This move allowed BUFFED not only to trap any Pokemon in the last attack used, either to switch later to something that resists it and generates an opportunity or directly to return it the next turn accurately, but now using status effects or trying to boost in front of it, which used to annihilate this Pokemon's strategy, became the worst possible idea. You can tell they were serious about fixing this species, and actually this makes me wonder if the idea of introducing abilities to Pokemon was born precisely from trying to improve BUFFED. For this reason and more, this creature would be banned to Ubers, but not only for the moment. It would stay there, in the Olympus of gods, viable for several generations, where it wasn't the most common thing. But from time to time, it would be seen giving a lot of problems even to them. If only some people appreciated what they had and stopped going after nonsense, they could achieve great things. Like the upgrade of the Chosen for the 4th gen, one of my favorite Pokemon that didn't even need the special physical split of moves to improve. Scizor, an extremely cool and powerful Pokemon, but until then really neglected, especially because it had few offensive options and a terrible ability, would receive in this generation an entire arsenal of upgrades aimed at those weak points. Like its new ability, Technician, which also boosts its new predilect weapon, Bullet Punch. Now Scizor could exploit its incredible natural endurance and type to find situations in which to use Swords Dance very easily, and then slaughter its opponents with one of the best priorities ever. Adding to that, its new Bug Bite boosted by Technician and even variants with U-Turn, and the choice items were amazing. So once again, despite being overused, this Pokemon was really a huge force in Ubers, where its U-turns devastated a category full of Psychic-type legendaries and mythicals, until Pale Blue Flames engulfed it completely. The future would have even more surprises in store for this ruthless killer. Its Mega is actually my favorite and the most underrated in my opinion, but once it was there, time and space would converge to make Scizor an almost perfect Pokemon. The 5th gen, even turning everything upside down once again and giving us a lot of candidates with the Eviolite, hidden abilities, and a multitude of changes in the power and accuracy of moves, is yet another of the unquestionable cases of the video. It's very simple. If we were saying that making the most of BUFFED used to be hard in a world without abilities, Ditto was completely useless in real battles, and it would remain like that for 4 long generations. Trying to use it meant, in the best case scenario, losing a turn to transform into the opponent. But since, to top it all off, Ditto maintains its very low HP stat, after using the move, it was generally a worse version of the Pokemon it transformed into. Because if what you wanted was to use Transform, even Smeargle made more sense. At least it was a bit faster, and could try to sleep the opponent with Spore before using the move. Yeah, it doesn't sound right, but even that was better. Wait, what? That holding its signature item, the Quick Powder, Ditto is faster than a Heracross with a Choice Scarf? It would be a shame if the boost didn't work when it's transformed. Anyway, in the 5th gen, everyone got together and said, it's kind of mean that an iconic Pokemon like this one, with a mechanic with so much potential as transforming into the opponent, only gets enslaved in the daycare and out of the competitive world. How about saving it with an ability special for it? That's how Imposter Ditto was born. With its new ability, it could transform without having to spend a turn using the move. Maybe it doesn't look like that, but it could really cause a lot of trouble. Just imagine a Ditto taking advantage of its opponent's boost to defeat it with the help of a Choice Scarf before it could do anything. However, there were many other situations in which it could give an unexpected twist to a battle. It was truly unpredictable, like an evil twin, one that if you let your guard down, ends everything you fought for. Anyway, in the 6th gen, a lot of things happened, but let's exclude Mega Evolutions and the equivalents of each generation because they come and go, so considering them would complicate everything too much. Let's focus on the base Pokemon. Besides that, this gen had 2 big changes in terms of battles. Of course, the Fairy type, but also the fact that some Pokemon's base stats began to be modified, I guess as an attempt to balance the Pokedex, and to make more creatures viable, allowing more variety in teams, especially in the adventure. But those were small changes which the ones who received them were grateful for, but which didn't transform them overnight. Of course, there are exceptions, like Clefable, who has always been a great Pokemon, versatile and also quite unpredictable. But those 10 extra points in special attack, and especially its new Fairy type, would make it frightening. Good defenses combined with a highly resistant type, Calm Mind, and as the final touch its ability, Magic Guard, which prevents this Pokemon from receiving indirect damage, being able to hold the Life Orb without taking damage. It was an extremely tough beast to take down, and at the same time it could also wreak havoc offensively. Clefable had arrived to the elite to stay, and it's still there even today. It even defeated the dark shadow that had been tormenting it until then, but of course the struggle with our side immersed in darkness never ends. Pelipper, a poor creature that had been flying over the peaceful lower ranks since its introduction, became a pillar of the competitive play in the 7th gen when it was blessed with a gift from the skies, Drizzle, plus a very welcome 10-point increase in its special attack. With the rain falling and in the company of authentic monsters of that era, Mega Swampert, Ash Greninja, and Manaphy among others, destruction was inevitable. But despite its average stats, Pelipper could also do a lot of damage on its own, with the rain and access to devastating moves precisely under it. An incredible jump for a Pokemon that never had been able to stand out. A gray era, when it seemed that heroes had become obsolete. In the video about nerfs, we saw how the Knight, the hero who stood by the lineage of kings for generations, was having its lowest days in the 8th gen, but the threat it faced was stronger than ever. A monster was back. When in Black and White, the residents of Lacunosa Town told legends of the monster that arrived in a meteorite and made anyone who went out at night disappear, you expected a much more terrible being than poor Kyurem, a lonely Pokemon who waits silently for a hero to fill its heart with truth and ideals. But this distorted image was also reflected in battles. After Rayquaza and Giratina, one would expect the third member of the Unova trio to be on a par with its peers, or even above them, but nothing could be further from the truth. Its stats, types, and moves made it much worse than its fellow dragons, which has some kind of logic being after all the empty shell of what it once was. But when in Black and White, two the real monsters, Black and White Kyurem, emerged, its black form ended up being equally disappointing. Unlike the white form, its most frightening and monstrous stat was the physical attack, but it had very few options in that category, making it a limited Pokemon to the point where it was even preferred to use it with a special moveset, wasting that brutal stat. All this bad luck meant that it never reached the level of the rest of the gods. But in Gen 8, everything would change with Dragon Dance and its moveset, and using that with new weapons such as Icicle Spear would unleash true terror wherever it went. Because the fateful fight of the 8th gen was the place where the heroes had the most to prove, but also the villains. This is the story of a monster who, having been pushed in the most obscene and unnatural way, would unleash an aberrant power that might well have ended the world had it not been for the hero. But when everything appeared to be at peace, a rumor began to spread. Somewhere out there, a much greater threat was waiting dormant. A demon had been sealed up until now, but soon it would awaken. Regieleki is a Pokemon with a monstrous power that seems destined to wipe out everything. With its aberrant speed stat, it even made Deoxys look like a Trick Room user, not to mention its ability that made its electric hits destroy as if it was holding choice specs. With Volt Switch, its skill as a pivot that wreaked havoc on the opposing team was something never seen before, but a single weak point in its strategy would keep it in check. Its limited moveset meant that ground types immune to its electric discharges put the brakes on its strategy, and precisely in the generation when hidden power wasn't there, which kept Regieleki at bay as a Pokemon of terrifying potential, but conveniently limited and restrained. But Scarlet and Violet would eventually arrive to break its chains, giving it not hidden power, but a much stronger version of it, with an ultra-boosted stab in whatever type suits its fancy. With an Ice-type Terra Blast, Regieleki becomes virtually unstoppable, annihilating in an act of chilling revenge the ground types that until now kept it at bay, as well as the dragon and grass types that could put up any resistance. The mighty Regigigas was never aware of the aberration it created, and the only way to stop Regieleki was to ban it instantly with the release of Pokemon Home. And voila! That was the most blessed Pokemon of each generation. Who knows if the upcoming DLC will bring some more boosts for the ones that truly deserve it. But as for you, I'll see you soon. Be nice.